Good evening. My name is Gary Morris. I have lived in Irving for 60 years. I am also a retired Marine and a veteran of the Vietnam War. Tonight, I have the honor and privilege of introducing a speech that was originally given by Iwo Jima veteran and fellow Irving resident Danny Thomas, given on January 26, of 1999. It was on that date that I hosted the Irving Heritage Society an ICTN presentation called The Pacific War Remembered. Mr. Thomas's speech, recalling his experience as a Marine corpsman on Iwo Jima, is a heart-rending account of one of the most hellish battles of World War II. It is a very personal history that provides a small but powerful glimpse of what warfare is really like for the individuals who are called upon to fight our nation's battles during times of war. Mr. Thomas would go on to fulfill speaking requests regarding his Iwo Jima experiences from all over the country many more times before his untimely death on January 1st, 2007. Danny, a 40-year resident of Irving, became a consultant to James Bradley for his book Flag of Our Fathers, and then later a consultant to Mr. Clint Eastwood for the movie version of Mr. Bradley's book. On Memorial Day of 2005, Danny Thomas was honored as a veteran of the Battle of Iwo Jima during the national PBS broadcast of the Memorial Day concert in Washington, D.C. Like many of the veterans of World War II who fought and survived that conflict, Danny was a genuine hero. He was awarded a Bronze Star with Valor for his efforts in rescuing a wounded Marine while under intense mortar fire. But Danny did not think himself as a hero. He was just a humble pharmacist who for the longest time would not talk about his war experiences, even when asked. He remained steadfastly silent for the most part for nearly 40 years until that night of January 26, 1999, when he gave his very moving speech for the first time. Danny always felt that the real heroes of World War II were the ones who died fighting in that war. After a long period of silence, he finally felt compelled to talk about his experiences to honor the memory of his friends and associates of his who never came back from Iwo. Memorial Day, which was once called Decoration Day, was officially proclaimed on May 5th of 1868 by General John Logan, National Commander of the Grand Army of the Republic, a veterans organization. It was observed for the first time on that May 30th of that same year. It's a day of remembrance for those who have died in our service to our nation. So on this Memorial Day of May 28, 2007, to honor and remember the brave veterans who died serving our country, I am very, very proud to introduce an encore presentation of Corpsman Thomas's speech about his experience on Iwo Jima.
I'd like to dedicate my presentation tonight to all the friends and comrades who do not make it back. They're now guarded in the streets of heaven, and I hope I'll see them one day. There was Chick and Slats and Gene and Andy and Jerry and Tex and so very many others. Semper Fi, guys. You'll remain forever young. But I'm not here to do a roll call of heroes. Some of these men and boys, the real heroes, are the stuff and substance of the story I am here to tell. What do I remember about Iwo Jima? To start with, I have to tell you there's a hell of a lot I don't remember about what happened. God knows sometimes it's difficult to handle what I can remember. See, when assaulting a beachhead, every sense you have kicks in, even some you didn't know you have. Like the amnesia sense. Did you ever hear that? Well, it exists. What happens here is when some things you see are so god-awful repulsive and so repugnant that you just wipe them out of your active memory with recall years later, or perhaps never if you're lucky. To sort of set the scene, Iwo Jima was in the prefecture of Tokyo, Japan, and we were the first enemy troops to successfully invade Japanese home territory in 2,000 years. It is an island which nature itself had constructed as a fortress, with Mount Suribachi as sort of a stunted little mountain, extinct volcano on the south end, and a plain in the middle, and a series of ridges and hills on the north end. Island consists of 7 square miles. That's about 1/4 the size of DFW Airport, to give you some perspective on it. In that 7 square miles, there were 1,500 caves interconnected by more than 16 miles of tunnels. Kind of hard to imagine. The plain area had 2 airfields and hundreds of reinforced concrete bunkers and pillboxes, all skillfully camouflaged or hidden by the ever-present cinders and sand. Below Mount Suribachi is the only usable landing beach. It's 2 miles long and covered with a mix of brown volcanic ash and black cinders, and it's very difficult to walk in and even more difficult to run in, and you darn sure couldn't dig a hole in it. The cinders and ash buried the artillery and trucks and jeeps and any wheel vehicle up to the hubcaps. And as you walked in it or tried to run, it buried your foot up to the ankle so that each step involved a long, lingering effort to remove that foot from that clutching sand. It was like trying to run in a wheat silo. The night before D-Day, none of us slept very much. I don't know whether it was anticipation or anxiety or fear. Probably a combination of all of them, mostly fear. Hair-raising, skin-crawling, gut-wrenching fear. Fear in its many forms and faces. And I have to admit there wasn't anybody more scared than I was. From the darkened deck of the transport, some of us watched the awesome, distant, non-stop naval bombardment of the island. Then we'd go below and write last letters home to family and girlfriends, and hopefully girlfriends. Then we'd return to watch the bombardment some more, and then go below again to check our weapons and our equipment for the 1,000th time. And then after a sleepless night, and all too soon, the PA system sounded chow call about 5 a.m. And I was hungrier than I had been in the previous 2 months of that long, seasick journey from Maui to Iwo. Thought I'd never get over that seasickness. But I had a big steak, and for breakfast, mind you, and Navy and Marines never served that to me before. I had a big steak and a stack of pancakes and 2 eggs on top, and all of it with real live maple syrup. And there's a veteran Marine sitting across from me, and he said, the condemned man ate a hearty meal. And I looked up at him, and it didn't slow me down. I went right on eating, but I chewed a little bit slower, and I thought a little bit more about it. Then pretty soon the PA system ordered us to the boarding areas in the bowels of the ship, where we climbed into our amphibious tractors. Then very soon we rolled out of the mothership by way of the bow doors, and then in groups of 10, the Amtraks began to circle like a bunch of aquatic carousels until all of the assault troops had left the motherships. Then there was a signal, there's a flare arched across the sky, and the circles broke up and became lines parallel to the beach. HR had arrived. The assault on Iwo Jima had begun. I landed with an assault rifle team in the second wave. As my Amtrak landed, there was very little firing on the beach. Everybody on all the Japanese enemy troops on there had orders from General Kuribayashi to hold the fire until we got ashore. Got congregated on there in bunches and let loose on us. By the time the ramp was halfway down, our guys were already jumping out into this weird shell-cratered moonscape. As I jumped from the ramp, I turned left and immediately saw the first dead human being of my young life. He was a good friend, a Liberty buddy. His young kid we all called Chick, who had landed just moments before me, and he'd apparently stepped on a landmine. He was neatly cut in half, and it looked like he was buried up to his waist. As I ran past him, I would swear that I saw his eyes blink and a hand move. I yelled something at him and then looked back to see if he was following. And that's when I saw the lower half of him with his legs and his intestines scattered out behind him. I can remember falling to my knees and vomiting my breakfast, ham, eggs, and all. Between retchings, I screamed, "Oh, damn them, oh, God, damn them." You see, Chick was a 15-year-old farm boy, 6 foot tall, who had lied about his age to get into the Marines, and he was a damn good Marine. This was his first beachhead. I don't know how long I tried to toss up my toenails. The next thing I remember, I was in a shell crater doing my job as a corpsman, applying tourniquets and sprinkling sulfa powder, applying pressure bandages and plugging sucking chest wounds and occasionally injecting a syringe of morphine, and moving to the next crater where more wounded lay. And our wounded were not just hit by rifles and shrapnel. They were mutilated by firing from heavier ordnance, anti-aircraft and anti-tank guns and so forth. By that time, the Japanese barrage of the beach had started with a vengeance. The beach was so crowded, hell, they didn't need to zero in on the beach. All they just had to do was aim, and it bound to hit a bunch of people. The first 5 or 6 waves of our assault troops had landed, and it seemed we just could not get off of that damn beach and its quagmire sand, which sapped our strength and our energy and stalled our jeeps and artillery and anything else on wheel, even tanks. I don't remember a lot about the rest of that first day, except that there was a lot of confusion. We did have a lot of casualties. I ran out of medical supplies several times. Once when I returned to the beach aid station to refill my first aid bag, corpsman bag, we called it a Unit 3, the doctors and corpsmen were there in the aid station were working desperately treating casualties, and the chief corpsman was busy triaging the wounded as they were brought in. And as I loaded my bag, a corpsman friend, a little short guy that everybody called Tex because he wore cowboy boots all the time. Even on Iwo Jima, he wore cowboy boots. 5 foot 3 or 4, just barely big enough and weighed just barely enough to get into the military. He was a Liberty buddy of the chief corpsman. And as he came into the shell crater, everything was set up in shell craters. There's no way to dig a hole in that sand. You just found the deepest shell crater you could get into and prayed. As Tex ran into the shell crater, he said, "Hey, Chief, I left my canteen with a wounded guy, and I'm dying of thirst. Do you have anything to drink?" Now, the Chief and Tex were notorious in trying to drink each other under the table when they went on liberty. The Chief kept on working and said, "Yeah, Tex, look on the back of my pack over there, and there's a full canteen there." Tex went to the canteen and quickly swallowed 4 or 5 big gulps, and then holding his breath and his eyes wide open in surprise like his tongue had just been bit by a centipede, he slowly twisted the cap back on the canteen and let out his breath, and you could almost see fire coming out. He took off out of that shell crater like a jet propelled. And then I heard the Chief say, "Oh, damn, I forgot to tell Tex that the canteen was full of torpedo juice." Now, friends, in case those of you don't know, torpedo juice is what we call 95% pure ethyl alcohol. Well, almost pure. It's 190 proof. That's pretty potent stuff. I finished loading my bag and looked out over the edge of the crater to see if it was safe to leave and for me to get back to work. And I saw a little sharp Tex come a-glumping back across the boondocks there. And over his shoulder, hands and feet almost touching the ground, was this, must have been a 12-foot tall Marine. Tex glumped into the shell crater and flopped this Marine at the feet of the doctor. and turn and glump back out of the shell crater. And that's the last I saw Tex for 3 or 4 days. And I don't know where he went those days. I don't know whether he was hibernating to sleep it off from that shot of alcohol he got, or whether he was circling in a flight pattern over the island. But I'll tell you more about him later. Next thing I remember that day, my platoon was up to the edge. This is the first day. My platoon was up to the edge of the first airfield, and it was late afternoon of this first day. We'd just been told to dig in and get ready for the usual first night banzai attacks. In nearly all previous invasions or beachheads, the first night you could count on a banzai attack and enemy infiltration. Well, night came on fast. I remember the soft plop of the star shells as they burst overhead and then slowly floated to the earth on some silken parachutes and letting out a ghostly white light as they descended. And their swinging motion cast moving shadows that made every bush and boulder look like it was enemy infiltration. I was holed up with 2 Marines who would not let me stand watch as we waited for this inevitable banzai and for the inevitable enemy infiltration. I drifted into an exhausted sleep, only to dream about my young friend Chick on the beach, and woke up screaming profanities and hearing a call for Corman, Corman. Well, my feet responded, and since I was connected to him at the ankle, I went along with him. Although the banzai never happened that first night, from the sound of our own rifle fire, enemy infiltration was occurring all along the line. Anything that moved was shot at, including shadows and me. And here I was making night house calls. By daybreak, I had several casualties, probably from friendly fire, to get back to the beach evacuation station. This is day 2. The beach was a mess. The surf had become treacherous and was swamping all small craft. During the night, enemy shells had wrecked boats and vehicles and supply dumps. The entire 2 miles of beach had only a few places where landing craft could get in with supplies and out with casualties. And here and there among the debris were Marines killed in the landing the day before. They were now half buried by tide and sand, with a foot sticking up here and a hand sticking up there. One in particular caught my eye. He was my friend, Slats. He was half buried with his face above the sand and one arm floating free, moving back and forth with each surge of the tide, as if he were beckoning me to follow him into death. I just met another nightmare. I don't remember anything more about that second day or getting back to my company. The regiment did advance 800 to 1,000 yards and take the first airfield that day. On the far side of the airfield, we turned north to enter the meat grinder and the amphitheater, which some called the Valley of Death. During the next few days that followed, we would advance 3 yards and fall back 2 with casualties all the way there and back. Then things started looking up on D+4, February 23rd. A little before noon, we heard shouting and boats and ships sounding and horns and whistles, and our radio man stood up and let out a hoop and a holler, and he stood up dancing a jig and waving his helmet, shouted, "The flag is up, the flag is up, look, on the mountain, the flag." He was cut short by a Japanese sniper bullet through the head. Someone had a pair of binoculars, and sure enough, there really was Old Glory on the mountain. Oh, dear God, what a relief that was. Because we now had control of the high ground at our backs, and we hadn't had that on the previous days. But we had more high ground to take in front of us. The meat grinder with Hill 382 and the amphitheater lay ahead of us. And we didn't know it at the time, but this was the very backbone of the defense of northern Iwo Jima, and it was fiercely defended. Now, the amphitheater was a broad, shallow, bowl-like valley about 300 yards wide, surrounded by cliffs with interconnecting caves, and each cave contained ordnance of some sort. And there were 1,000 stinking sulfur steam vents in the valley floor, adding to the smell of cordite and burned and rotting and putrid human flesh and their dead and ours. This was the very epitome of hell. This was my longest nightmare. That repulsive odor has tainted all my dreams ever since. And they've been frequent. Sometime during the last week or so of the operation, I heard from Tex again. It was just before dark, and he sent me word that he needed me to bring all the medicinal brandy. Corbin carried these little 2-ounce bottles of Lejeune brandy for cases just kind of like this, combat fatigue. And I must confess, we took a little nip ourselves every now and then. But he needed me to bring all the medicinal brandy over to his area that I had left in. That he had a bad combat fatigue case, and it was too late to get a Jeep up to the front. When I got there, both techs in the combat fatigue case were liberally soused, and at the end of their supply of brandy, and the patient had stopped crying and was sniffling and gasping for breath like a kid at the end of a cry. Tex was a talker. He could talk you out of your socks and shoes and make you like it. Tex was telling him about how we would get this guy safely back to the beach and into a small boat and out to the hospital ship where he would get to sleep in a nice soft bunk and clean white sheets, and a pretty nurse would come fluff his pillow and tuck him into bed. By this time, the patient was over his cry and was blowing his nose when Tex said, between hiccups, "Why, in a couple of days you'll be good as new and be right back up here with us." With that, the guy broke down. He's bawling like a spanked child. It's pure and simple. This was a case of a lot of brandy and, most of all, a lot of oversell. The patient didn't want to hear any more of that back up here with us stuff. Well, after winning and losing Hill 382 several times, passage through the Valley of Death took us more than 3 weeks to go the 3 miles to reach the sea in Tachiiwa Point. It was now March 17th, 26 days after D-Day. Iwo Jima was declared secured. The 4th Marine Division, had taken all of its objectives at a great loss. We lost at least half of all of our landing force. Those of us who remained in the company made our way back to the landing beach by way of the 4th Marine Division Cemetery, which is located between the airfields. We wanted to say goodbye to our fallen comrades. There I found the grave of a very, very dear friend, Jewel E. Gass. He didn't like to be called Jewel. She said, "I ain't no Jewel. Call me Jerry." Jerry was also a Navy corpsman. He had already been through 4 operations, 4 beachheads. He's about 4 years older than I was. He sort of adopted me, and he became my big brother and my mentor. I shall always be grateful to Jerry. He had taught me how to have the Dutch courage to do what I had to do as a corpsman, something that only experience could teach. This happened by one night late in this long seasick sea journey from Maui. I admitted to Jerry that I was a devout coward and was scared stuffless. This was my first beachhead. I did not want to be a coward and let my buddies down. His advice was, "Danny, don't be afraid of fear because that is an essential part of courage. Without fear, there is no courage. Here's what you do. When you hear a call for corpsman, move. Don't stop to think, just move, or you might not go." With a hand on his grave marker, I thanked him for that advice and for his friendship. In that cemetery, I also found the grave of Chick, my Liberty buddy from the beach. Someone had put on his grave a flat piece of sandstone on which was carved the words, "But God, 15 years is not enough." I promised my Liberty buddy that I would drink a buttermilk toast to him. He did so love buttermilk, and neither of us could buy alcoholic drinks when we were on Liberty. We were too young. In the 2 hours we were in that cemetery, several damaged B-29s made sputtering emergency landings close over our heads, and they landed on the airfield we had captured for their benefit. Late that afternoon, we got on small craft and went out to the larger troop transports and climbed cargo nets of the deck. And there had been a little conversation since leaving the cemetery. Most of those young, now ancient faces had slack jaws and heads drooped and wide-eyed, thousand-yard stare, and they'd given all they had to give without breaking. And like me, they were remembering friends and comrades who had given more. Rudyard Kipling, in Recessional, wrote, "The tumult and the shouting dies, the captains and the kings depart. Still stands thine ancient sacrifice, an humble and a contrite heart. Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget. Lest we forget." Semper Fi, guys.